I have found Outbeat News in depth for you.
Good evening and welcome to Outbeat News in Depth. I'm Greg Moralia. Well, last month, during our coverage of the 2015 Matthew Shepard Foundation Honors Event, you heard from the Maines family, and you heard them talk about their transgender daughter, Nicole, their unconditional love as a family, and how they overcame the many struggles and challenges from those who didn't understand them. They tell their story in a brand new book just released this month called Becoming Nicole. And tonight, Pulitzer Prize-winning author Amy Nutt and Nicole's dad, Wayne Maines, are both here to tell us more about this incredible story. And in the second half of our hour, Francis DiBernardo, director of New Ways Ministries, returns to tell us about his experience in Rome with the Pope's recent synod, a meeting of Catholic Church leaders on the family, which included the subject of same-sex marriage and what place LGBT people have in the Church. All of this is coming up next, right after your Outbeat Radio News for this Sunday, November 22nd, 2015.
I have found Outbeat Radio News, your source for LGBT news from the North Bay and beyond.
It's reported that a fugitive terrorist who's still on the run after the attacks in Paris a week ago was trawling several gay bars in Brussels mere days before the coordinated attacks. 26-year-old Salah Abdeslam, who's currently being hunted by special forces, was a regular visitor to the city's gay village. Hours of closed-circuit television footage from bars in central Brussels, an area known as Jacques Quarter, is being secured by security services. Bar owners are being questioned as officers try to determine whether he was scoping out potential targets or hoping to steal customers' identification and documents. An anonymous source said, "In these crowded bars, people feel open and relaxed. Stealing wallets would be not so difficult. A lot of ID cards and driving licenses were stolen over a period that he was there, but it may not have been because he wanted to launch a terror attack." Salah was a getaway driver for one of the suicide squads during last Friday's attack. He swore he'd never give himself up after being spotted in Brussels. A contact claims he was blindfolded and led to the terrorists at the Bolt Hole on Tuesday evening, which is believed to be somewhere in the Molenbeek district. The source said, "I met Salah on Tuesday night. He is here in Brussels, but not for long. He told me that he has gone too far. He's now overwhelmed by what happened and cannot give himself up because there will be consequences for his family." Abdeslam allegedly told the source they had rented both an apartment in Paris and the cars used in Friday's attacks. On Thursday, it was reported that Abdeslam is a gambling addict and visited the main casino in Brussels over 20 times in the month leading up to the attack. While playing the tables, he apparently had a string of one-night stands. After being fired from his job as a bus driver, Abdeslam reportedly radicalized in January 2011. Anti-terror units continue hunting for the man known as Public Enemy No. 1. And here in the U.S., this week the FBI released their annual report on hate crimes reported in 2014. There were 9% fewer of these hate crimes reported overall, but hate crimes motivated by the victim's sexual orientation remain the second most common bias motivation at 1,017 reported crimes. There were 131 crimes committed because of the victim's gender identity, 98 of which involved a transgender or gender non-conforming victim. 63% of the reported hate crimes involved a crime of violence. California recorded a 12% drop in reported hate crimes in 2014. Sexual orientation was also the second most common bias motivation in our state. LGBT civil rights groups believe that hate crimes continue to be dramatically underreported, although California law requires law enforcement to report hate crimes to the Department of Justice. Reporting to the FBI remains voluntary. And Philadelphia Mayor Michael Nutter signed a new law yesterday on the 2015 Transgender Day of Remembrance that requires all single-occupancy restrooms in bars and restrooms to be designated as gender-neutral. The new law takes effect on January 16th. The religious right has had recent success in overturning or defeating proposed LGBT non-discrimination laws by claiming the laws will allow men in women's restrooms. Supporters say that making the restrooms gender-neutral is inclusive of transgender people who often face harassment in public restrooms. By removing the gender designation, it removes the impetus for strangers to judge whether the gender non-conforming person is using the correct restroom. And here locally, the 25th Annual Holiday Benefit Concert supporting Face to Face and performed by the San Francisco Gay Men's Chorus will happen on Sunday, December 6th at the Wells Fargo Center. This festive and heartwarming, simply not to be missed extravaganza starts at 3 p.m. on Sunday, December 6th. Tickets are $19 to $50 and available now at the Wells Fargo Center for the Arts box office or online at wellsfargocenterarts.org. Now here's your calendar of events for the coming week. On Monday, November 23rd at 5:30 p.m., the Marin AIDS Project will host its monthly Mix It Up at the Four Points Sheraton, 1010 Northgate Drive in San Rafael. And on Tuesday, November 24th, the Santa Rosa Senior Group will meet at the Unitarian Universalist Congregation at the Glacier Center in Santa Rosa. And also on Tuesday, That's Amor, an Italian Give Back Tuesday buffet dinner will take place at the Rainbow Cattle Company in Guerneville, 6 to 8 p.m. The proceeds will benefit the Russian River Sisters Community Holiday Dinner. You can learn more at rrsisters.org. For more information about LGBT events happening here in the North Bay, go to gaysonoma.com. And for all the latest LGBT news headlines, go to our website at outbeatnews.com. Be sure to like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter for updates from Outbeat Radio News all week long. For Gary Carnabelli, I'm Greg Morelia.
Outbeat Radio News, your source for LGBT news from the North Bay and beyond.
Imagine adopting twin boys and having one discover and begin to identify as a little girl. There aren't a lot of parents out there with this kind of experience, and I'd guess most wouldn't even know what to do. But Kelly and Wayne Maines figured it out from the very beginning and showed unconditional love for their children, one of whom became their beautiful daughter, Nicole. They share their extraordinary story in a brand new book just released this month called Becoming Nicole, written by Pulitzer Prize-winning author Amy Nutt. Amy and Wayne, welcome to the show.
Great to be here.
Glad to be there.
So, Amy, let's start with you. How did you come to meet this amazing family?
Well, it was really a serendipity. The family was being represented at the time. There was a lawsuit. This was in 2011, 2012, just after an article had appeared in the Boston Globe about the family, and they were kind of fending off a lot of publicity requests at that point because they just wanted to concentrate on raising their kids, but knew that down the line that perhaps they wanted to tell their story in a bigger format. So their lawyer, Jennifer Levy, was someone that I had known in Boston many years earlier in a former life as an academic, and she contacted me, and the rest is history.
Well, that's great. Wayne, how old were your then two boys when you and Kelly adopted them?
Basically at about 5 months.
Okay, so you had them really from the very beginning.
That's right.
Essentially.
Yes, and it was an interesting time.
So tell us about Nicole's development. I mean, I understand from what you told us at the Matthew Shepard Foundation dinner that she began to express her gender and the fact that she was a girl very early on. What do you remember about that?
Well, for me, the earliest memory, and I think Amy really presents it well in the book, is Nicole and her diapers. Her mother would do kickboxing in our farmhouse, and Nicole would be there in her diaper with a Barbie in her hands, shaking the hair back and forth and mimicking Kelly kickboxing. And that couldn't have been more than 2. And you didn't really think of it as any big deal then. But when you look back and you look at all the video, the signs and the symptoms were there. You know, signs are things we see, and symptoms are things that people describe to you. And when she was old enough to talk, then we started experiencing symptoms of, Daddy, this is who I really am.
And this is, 17 years ago now, right?
Yeah, it was a long time ago.
So there was no Laverne Cox, there was no Caitlyn Jenner, there was not a real visibility at all. Not that there's a great visibility now of transgender people. how did you work through that? What did you make of that? Did you have an understanding right from the beginning about what was going on, or?
I had no understanding. I avoided it like the plague. Kelly really reached out and started to look on the internet, and there was nothing. And it's only been in the last few years that there's been anything for transgender children. And there's one of the reasons that I really appreciate the book is to get it in the hands of people that, because they're starting to understand that transgender adults exist, but they can't wrap their head around that a 3-year-old really knows who they are. You hear this craziest things like, I want to be, Buzz Lightyear, and I want to be, whoever, and that's just dreams. Well, not when it's in your soul. In every waking moment, you're trying to be who you need to be. You and I always knew we were guys, and can you imagine somebody every day telling you that no, you're not? And that's just brutal to think about how much these young kids are suffering.
Well, you're right. I can't imagine that. I mean, I've said many times to even my students that I understand cognitively gender identity and gender dysphoria, but until you've lived it, I don't think you can truly understand what that's like and the realization of that conflict inside. I can't even imagine what that's like. So talk about steps. I mean, it's clear you were supportive as a family from the very beginning. How did you begin to work through this? I mean, obviously, Nicole's very young at this point. As she began to grow up, what steps did you take to help guide her realization that she's a girl?
Well, I think it's really important that people understand that I wasn't very supportive in the beginning, and that's, the first 6 chapters, I think Amy beat the crap out of me, so, yeah. But I had a great recovery, but it wasn't that I didn't love my child. I loved my babies, both of them, but I just didn't understand it, and there wasn't a lot of research and support, and even the counselors that we started with had no clue how to deal with a young transgender child or non-conforming child. That's another thing that's important, that people understand that every child that's non-conforming at age 3 and 4 isn't going to be transgender. You have to let them grow and be who they need to be, and then they'll figure it out and tell you who they are. But in the beginning, man, I really struggled, and I tried to stay with the counselors and gender neutral, but Nicole was such a strong personality, and thank goodness that she had a mom who had the strength and the courage to let her be who she needed to be, or I would have really screwed it up.
And so how did Jonas grow into this? Nicole's twin brother, how did he grow into this understanding?
Well, he never had to grow into it. He always understood it. That's the amazing thing about kids. Their generation as babies, they don't care. And, of course, they're identical twins, and they're bonded, and he never really had to understand it.
Huh. But that wasn't true for the schools. I remember you talking, and Jonas and Nicole talking a lot about the torment that both of them endured at school, Nicole in particular. Tell us a little bit about that.
When we started school, we knew it wasn't going to be easy, but we were up for the challenge, and there was innocent questions, and there was teasing and bullying, and because it was so new. And then sometimes there's just mean kids out there, but that was all manageable, and no child, transgender or any other, should have to deal with bullying and harassment. It just breaks my heart. But as she got older, and it really became more targeted, the Christian right got involved, and they came and showed up at our school and our town meeting with cameras and attorneys, and all hell broke loose. And that's where that was the last straw for me. I really got involved after that, and not long after that, we had to go into hiding to protect our kids. Wow. Nobody should have to do that.
No, you're absolutely right. And refresh my memory on what town this was all going on in. What part of the country?
It's in Orono, Maine. It's where I'm still here. I still work here. I live 2 hours north of where Kelly and the kids live, and I've lived here alone since 2009 because I have to work.
Wow. Wow. And so the resolution wasn't that some legal action happened to force the school to comply to provide the kind of support and facilities Nicole needed. It was you had to leave.
Yeah, the solutions were unbearable. She was ostracized and segregated to a staff bathroom, and maybe Amy can talk a little bit about that too. What's going on across the nation? That seems to still be their solution in many states, a gender-neutral bathroom just for transgender kids, and that's unacceptable. There was a time in Maine that they thought that was the solution, and of course we cracked that.
And how did you go? How did that happen?
We won our court case. It took 5 years, and in Maine, everybody gets to use the bathroom and locker room that they identify with. It's state law.
So that's pretty incredible. You engaged in this court battle, obviously to support Nicole, but really in doing so, supported all the other trans kids that are out there. Was it tough finding a legal firm to take this on to support you?
It was in the beginning. I'll never forget, I wrote to every major LGBT group in the country. I mean, we had our own attorney, and we were pretty much out of money. And Mr. Conservative, I wrote to the National Lesbians Association, the Transgender Law Center, everybody and their brother, and they were all, they responded, they knew, and they were supportive, but I'm not sure. And it was finally amazing. I'll never forget it. It was a Sunday. We met with a local attorney, Jody Knopfsinger, who happens to be a board member of the ACLU, and we went to her office, and she's not a civil rights attorney. She's just an amazing person, attorney. And she said to me, I'm going to work with GLAAD, and I'm going to take your case, and GLAAD's going to support you, and I need you to quit playing attorney. And I broke down. It's still amazing, the people that stepped up to help us. So,
and that's refreshing to hear because, looking back in the years when I'm picturing this all happen, there was sort of a divide going on in the LGBT community. There were political movements at the federal level where the HRC and other organizations were trying to get employment protection, and there was this idea that, well, if it's the trans community that's going to hold this or hold us up, then we'll separate from them temporarily and then come back and pick up the trans community later on. And that attitude just seems to be horrible. So I'm glad.
I understand some of that, but also I'm a political novice, but I think everybody's where they need to be now. One of my best friends that I met in Washington works for the Human Rights Commission or the HRC, and they're doing great things. And every one of those groups, we have to be unified. And quite frankly, gender identity, gender expression do not belong under the auspices of sexual orientation. It's still written that way in law in Maine today. It's just where it ended up, and that confuses people, especially when it's young people.
Yeah, because they are clearly two different aspects of personality, and politically they've been combined, but clearly there are some very different issues and very different needs of the two groups, one not being any more important than the other. So the two kids ended up moving to a new town and went into a new school. How did you know that was the right school and that history wouldn't be repeating itself?
Man, Greg, that's a really powerful question because history is repeating itself all over the nation. We had nowhere to go. Any school in Maine, the profile that we had to take us, and they had to say the right things, but we would, until there was a problem, we wouldn't know whether they would support us. And there was only, so that through the rest of middle school, we lived in hiding. The school was supportive, but who knows if they would have been if we had to go public. because it's a huge challenge for any administration. And it wasn't until high school that we found an amazing high school that had the courage and management to do the right thing.
So when you say going into hiding, what does that look like?
It means sending your kids to school every day and telling them that you can't tell anybody who you are, or if you do, that daddy might have to quit his job and we'll have to move, and not knowing where to move.
Wow. That must have been really challenging for them, and challenging. Yeah, challenging is an understatement.
Yeah, they were living a lie. It was really hard. It was.
So you found a new high school, and you said that it was an amazing school. And so what changed? What made the difference? How did you know that they could be out and who they are?
Well, we didn't start that way the first few weeks, but it was the kids' choice at that point. And the school sent a letter to all the parents in the school community and said that we have a transgender child in our community. And didn't name any names, but they said, we're here to support everybody, and everybody gets to use the bathroom in the locker room that they want to. And there were some minor issues, and they handled them. Most of them I never even knew about until later. And it was mostly innocent questions. And then in 2011, that same year, we came out of hiding to testify, and then there was no holding back, and the whole school was just amazing and supportive.
Amy, what's your sense about how common that is now around the country with other high schools? It sounds to me like this high school is pretty unique still today.
Yeah, I think they are. They basically, came right out and were upfront in telling Wayne and the family that the school was open and ready for their kids. It's a private school. It had a very small population of students. I think that helped. But certainly it's going on across the country, and obviously not only in schools. We know we look at places like Houston, but going on all levels of government and public accommodation across the board.
Well, it's remarkable that Jonas and Nicole both came out of this experience, and they're in college now. How do you think? What was the key? How did they do it? What allowed them to blossom so amazingly well?
Wow. Well, having parents that allow them to be who they need to be is number one. We made mistakes, obviously, and we tried to learn from our mistakes, and we in certain days had to tell them that so many transgender families they deal with their kids, any special need child maybe, with kid gloves on occasion. And sometimes we had to tell Nicole, it doesn't matter if you're transgender, you still got to clean your room, and you got to clean the house on Sunday, and you need to do your homework, So they kind of lost track of cleaning their rooms. I've been to both their college rooms, so but there's some discipline involved, and just consistent love and consistent reinforcement, and sometimes putting the hammer down, So, and all that time they had to take care of themselves. There's so much that they told Amy that we didn't even know. They had to take care of themselves.
So, Amy, as you heard the story as being told from Jonas and Nicole's perspective, what are some things that you learned from them that maybe surprised you or that you weren't expecting to hear?
I think one of the biggest surprises. They're both extraordinary kids. Nicole is a very confident, very positive person, and I think one of the things that really struck me was that right from the beginning, Kelly, in trying to help Nicole, and of course she was known as Wyatt back then. Her main objective was just to help her be happy and safe. That was it. So Nicole grew up never feeling that she was different or odd, or that either her mother or her father thought, that she was abnormal in any way. So she grew up always believing that things would be taken care of, and and that she would get to be the beautiful young woman she is today. And there are so many stories across the country and Wayne has certainly heard so many of these stories from people of kids who are suicidal, or who are throwaways or runaways, or have been rejected in so many ways. And even though Wayne struggled for a few years, these were parents who never rejected their child, and it made all the difference in the world.
Clearly. There's not words that you can really put in to describe how incredible it is to watch them up on stage and hear them, because I think you're very right. Nicole is amazingly confident. When she stepped up to the mic to start speaking, I mean, Tony and I both were completely blown away. It's like, oh my goodness. And Jonas has an incredible heart for being a young man his age. He knows, he's so worldly already. He knows so much, and just both really, really impressive. I just can't say enough about that. So as you think about all that you've learned, Wayne, about this country, the culture of a small town, the culture of the East Coast, all that you've learned now in 2015, talk to the parents out there who are wondering if their kids might be expressing some question about their gender. What advice would you have for them?
Well, I think the first thing is love your children. I mean, I know they do, and not to let their fears control their mind. Jonas actually told me that when he was like 12, and it's okay to be afraid, but we still have to be open to new ideas and get the resources that we need. And that means counselors and doctors and teachers, and talk to people. And for those conservative parents, and especially dads in other parts of the country, and even here in northern Maine, you got to dig deeper. And we think we're tough guys, but they got to dig a little deeper and explore what they're afraid of. And if they can do that, if they can even go out and sit in their tree stand this time of year in November in Maine, that's where I would normally be if I wasn't living alone. And I would take that time to think about, how can I help that child grow? How can I reach outside my own comfort zone and support my family in ways that I might not think possible? And that means giving up a couple things, giving up some values that we thought were important that really aren't. Because at the end of the day, like you said, seeing my two kids up on that stage doesn't get any better than that. And every kid should have that stage in some way in their lifetime. So get up, get off your butt, and explore your own deep inner thoughts and find out why are you uncomfortable about anything, and how can you let that impact your child's growth. And
be proud of them.
Yeah, and be proud every step of the way. I never tried to put my child in a place where they wouldn't have high-level self-esteem. And I think that's probably the most important thing we can do. If they feel good about themselves, they're going to be okay.
So, Amy, let's get back to the book for a second. What are you hoping people get? What are you hoping that they learn from reading the story?
Gosh, I think there are so many lessons of the book. One of the things is that, this is a very ordinary family. This is a family like your own family or like other families, that you know. These are people that you live with, that you know, that you work with, and they're no different, than you are. And I think that's really important for readers to make that connection. And I can think of no better example than an email I received today that I sent to Wayne and Kelly that was extraordinary. And it was from a man in Auckland, New Zealand, who had read the book and just wanted me to know and wanted the message passed on to Kelly and Wayne that he was not only moved by their story, but he was changed. That he was a conservative, religious man, believed that gender was very binary, and the book changed his mind. And it changed his mind to the degree that he owns a company, a tech company, and he had someone come in, interview for a job, and the person had, I guess, written on their resume that they were involved in LGBTQ issues, and ordinarily this would have been something that might have disqualified him in the minds of this employer. And he said, I hired the guy right on the spot. And he says, really? Mm-hmm. It was because of reading about the Maines family. And it was an extraordinary letter to receive as a journalist. You hope you make a difference. You hope you can move people and at best perhaps even change them. But that was pretty extraordinary. And, I just told the story. It's the example of this family that is so powerful. Getting messages like that means, I feel like the book has hit a home run.
Well, I would say that it has. I mean, that's incredible. It's great to get that kind of feedback. And Wayne, for you and Kelly and the kids, it must be really gratifying to hear from people around the world about how your story is impacting them after all that struggle.
It really is. And I'll tell you, there's been hundreds of them. And some days you open your email and you just wish you could meet the people and give them a hug. I never was a emotional or a huggy person, but I am now, and it's just amazing that. And I think for me, the most important thing for the book is so people understand that we're not alone. We're just one of thousands of amazing average families out there that are going through the same thing.
Well, pioneers, though, in terms of being able to tell your story and to help educate others, because it's certainly one thing to look at celebrities like Laverne Cox and Caitlyn Jenner, but very difficult and a far stretch to make that connection with, as you describe it, a typical average family. And so I think that's one of the powers that lies in that book as well, is it the ability to connect and see, yeah, this is just like us. Where can people go to get a copy of Becoming Nicole?
Well, they can go to right away to Amazon.com or BarnesandNoble.com or your independent bookstore. You can buy it, you can download it, and it's obviously readily available.
Fantastic. We'll put a link to at least the Amazon website for the book. You can go right to outbeatnews.com and click on that link and download your own copy. We've been talking with Wayne Maines and Amy Nutt about an extraordinary book. Thank you both for being on the show with us tonight.
Thank you.
And if you're just joining us, you're listening to Outbeat News in Depth on KRCB Radio 91. I'm Greg Moralia. Well, it's no secret that the Catholic Church isn't exactly welcoming of LGBT people. Pope Benedict XVI wrote that homosexuals are, quote, intrinsically disordered. Catholic cardinals and bishops here in the U.S. regularly speak out condemning gay people and those who support them. But these views didn't reflect the 70% of Catholics who believe homosexuality should be accepted. And Pope Francis has signaled on several occasions a different idea about LGBT people. As we reported here on Outbeat News earlier in the month, many faiths, including the Mormons, are evolving their position on LGBT people and same-sex marriage. Here to talk about these prospects for the Catholic Church is Francis DiBernardo, Director of New Ways Ministries, an LGBT pro-Catholic organization. Francis, welcome back to the show.
Great to be here.
And it's great to have you and to find out about your adventure in Rome. But for our listeners who are not familiar with New Ways Ministries and how it fits into the Catholic Church, tell us about it and your role in it.
Sure. Well, New Ways Ministry is a 38-year-old national Catholic ministry that strives to build bridges of justice and education between the LGBT community and the Catholic Church. And I have the privilege of serving as executive director of that ministry.
And how long have you been involved?
I've been involved for over 20 years. I've been the executive director for almost 20 years and have been working since 1994, so 22 years.
Wow. So you've really seen a lot of change. And when we last had you on the show, it was right after Pope Francis was elected, and we were talking about your hopes for him. As you look back now since that time, what do you think? Has he fulfilled your hopes?
I think Pope Francis is doing a lot for the Catholic Church generally, and for LGBT people and LGBT Catholics in particular. He hasn't done the what we are eventually hoping for, which is, some sort of change in practice and approach. But his tone has really set a good example for pastoral ministers and priests, nuns working in the church to be more open to LGBT issues. Mm-hmm. And that's an important first step. So we're happy that he's taken that first step.
Well, that's great. And before we get to talking about the Synod, and you can explain exactly what that is when we get there,
sure.
Let's talk about his visit to the U.S., because that was very popular. It was all over the news. That was really all people were talking about while he was here. And he certainly attracted a lot of people, I think Catholics certainly, and then outside observers as well. Did you get a chance to be part of any of the events or see him?
Yes, I was lucky enough to be able to get to the White House ceremony where President and Michelle Obama welcomed Pope Francis in a formal ceremony, and so I was there on the South Lawn, which was very exciting. And it was very exciting for a number of reasons, but one of them being that the Obamas had invited a lot of LGBT leaders to that event. And so it was, I think, an important recognition that that LGBT issues have really reached a new level in our culture and our society here in the U.S.
That's really interesting. There was some pushback from that too, from some anti-LGBT groups that may or may not have been affiliated with the Catholic Church. What was the tone there in the environment? Did the Vatican officials appear to be comfortable? Was there any noticeable difference?
No, I think everyone, including the Vatican officials, were very comfortable with it. President Obama and the White House know what they're doing, and they don't want to offend one of their most revered guests that they've had throughout his presidency. And so, if they didn't think that this would be okay with the Pope, I think they would not have made those invitations. I think they recognize that Pope Francis is very open to LGBT issues. He's had LGBT people in other situations where he's visited other countries, most recently this summer in Paraguay, the bishops of Paraguay invited an LGBT rights leader to be part of a session with the Pope. So, if the Paraguayan bishops knew that it would be okay, I'm pretty sure that the Obamas knew it would be okay.
Yeah, and it's really interesting to watch all of the social media commentary about that and about what the motivations were and whether the Pope knew or didn't know. But it's great. I'm glad that happened, and I'm glad that was the case. And one of the other stories that emerged was this secret meeting, and I put that in quotes, that he had with Kim Davis, the county clerk in Kentucky, who has been fighting so desperately to not issue marriage licenses to same-sex couples. And the rumor was that the Pope had a private meeting with her before he left at I guess it was the Vatican Embassy. Can you shed some light on what really happened there?
Sure. I think the Vatican, the U.S. media, and the international audience in general were really all blindsided by Miss Davis's lawyers, who blew up a very minor encounter with the Pope into making it sound as if it was a formal meeting, which it was not, which we learned it was not. And, I think the way that the Vatican responded to that, at first I think the Vatican should have responded a lot quicker, but I think they were... I think the fact that they were slow in responding means that they didn't know what was going on, that this was something that someone else had planned.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, I think they would have responded much quicker. And then when it came out and they confirmed that his one official audience in the U.S. with an individual was with a former student of his who is gay, who came with his partner and his family to visit the Pope, and the Pope hugged them both. So, I think the Kim Davis incident was really a case where lawyers blew something up to try to make their client look more favorably in the Catholic Church's eyes than she might be.
Yeah, that sounds that way. And of course, the situation was probably exaggerated more by a comment that maybe was taken out of context. Supposedly, the Pope made a comment about, responded to a question as he was getting on the plane to leave about a person's right as a public official based on religious grounds to not do their job. I mean, that was in essence. And he suggested that civil disobedience or refusing to do your job as a public official based on religious grounds was okay, almost validating Kim's position.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think the problem with that answer is that I'm not sure that the Pope knew what example or context the person was asking the question
right
in. So I think it was probably in the questioner's mind, to think about Kim Davis and situations concerning same-sex marriage, where I think the Pope was answering very generally, where Catholic teaching would support people's conscience. But, if it is something that is very egregious, such as killing someone. So I think the Pope's comments were taken out of context, and he admitted during that time that he was not talking about anything in particular.
Right.
So,
well, that's that happens all the time with folks, right? And then people will use those statements out of context to their own advantage, and the timing of it just didn't play out well, and I think it created a lot of confusion for folks.
Yes, it was really, the Pope was very sophisticated in his speeches while he was here in the U.S., and he really, navigated the minefield of American politics very, very carefully, and really made it a pastoral visit. rather than a political visit.
I agree with you. I listened to his address to Congress, and I thought it was brilliant. It was just brilliant. It was eloquent. It was well researched, and you're right. It walked a very careful, fine line that really was able to touch both sides of the aisle there, and gave them some strong advice about their role and how they should move forward. I thought it was great.
Right. And, Pope Francis, in all of his visits, and it was true on the American visit too, the only time he ever uses very harsh words are when he's addressing bishops. And that was true in the U.S. He really sent a strong message to bishops not to be so politically minded and not to be so rigid. I think that was a very telling part of his agenda, that he's welcoming of all people, but he really wants the church's leaders to get away from their narrow-minded political points of view.
Right. Well, he's got his hands full there because there are a lot of very outspoken cardinals and bishops who, even recently are speaking out in ways that seem to be very opposite of what the Pope is saying should be happening. So let's shift to the synod. First of all, what is it?
Okay. Well, the synod is a meeting of bishops, not all bishops, but bishop representatives who've been elected by the bishops in their countries, to come together at the Vatican to discuss a topic. In this case, it was marriage in the family, and to develop a set of recommendations. And that's important. It was they make recommendations, not decisions. They make recommendations to the Pope on this topic, marriage in the family, and then the Pope has the privilege of issuing what's called an apostolic exhortation, which is a document from the Pope on the topic, and he can either accept or reject the bishop's recommendations. So that's what the synod is. There were 270 bishops at the synod, and there were over 5,000 bishops in the world. So it was a very small representation of the bishops.
Okay, that's right. That is a pretty small amount,
right,
of representation. And is this a meeting that happens on a regularly scheduled basis, or is this sort of a special event?
No, the Pope calls the meeting if he sees a topic that he thinks needs discussion. And I think he very wisely selected the topic of marriage and family because it is an issue of great pastoral concern in the church, and where the Catholic people are often hold very different views about marriage, family, and sexuality than the bishops do. So it was a topic that really needed addressing.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think there is a big divide in terms of what people in the pews think and what the leaders believe. I think I read a survey recently, just this last week, that said that 70% of American Catholics believe the church should be accepting of LGBT people.
Yeah. That was the Pew Research report.
Right. And so if bishops and cardinals are at some level accepting of LGBT people, that certainly isn't being communicated out there in the public. Just right after the Pope's visit, there was a cardinal on the East Coast who spoke out in a very damaging way, in my view, talking about how if you support LGBT people or you believe in same-sex marriage, that you're not entitled to communion. And for a Catholic, that's devastating. I mean, it really does pit families against supporting one another and being part of their faith. So talk about the access that you had. Were you actually in the meeting with the bishops?
Mm-hmm. No, none of the press representatives were allowed into the meetings themselves. They were closed sessions. But every day, at 1 p.m., the Vatican spokesperson would bring to the press room 3 or 4 bishops who would report on what was discussed at the meeting that morning or the day before, and then there was opportunity to question them. And then there was also opportunity to make requests of individual bishops for interviews, and I was lucky enough to get a few of them as well.
So tell us about those interviews, and how were you received? Obviously, people know who you are and the organization that you represent.
I was very well received by the other press representatives, by the Vatican officials, who really made sure that I was treated just as any other press representative was. I was able to interview a few bishops. I interviewed, probably the most extensive interview I had was with Cardinal Oswald Gracias, who is from India, from Mumbai, India, and he's the president of the Indian Bishops' Conference. And I had a great interview with him about pastoral outreach to LGBT people. I was able to interview Cardinal Peter Turkson, who works at the Vatican on justice and peace issues, and I was able to interview him about the issue of LGBT people being criminalized in countries around the globe. I was able to raise that question of criminalization with an African bishop during one of the press conferences, and he acknowledged that the African bishops really need to grow a bit in terms of their awareness of LGBT issues.
Yeah, because they do have a huge influence, I think, in countries as leaders, and being silent about what's going on in places like Uganda and other parts of Africa, I think, is really damaging.
Yes, they don't have a great record on speaking out against these criminalization laws, and it's really shameful because there's nothing in those laws there's nothing in church teaching that would prevent them from opposing those laws. It would be a very Catholic, a very Orthodox position to oppose them.
I would think so, for sure. So, did you detect levels of discomfort when you posed those kinds of questions, or did they really get it?
Well, when I asked the African Archbishop at the press conference, when I asked my question about him, and I asked him if he thought that the African bishops would support a statement from the Synod opposing criminalization. And after I asked it, there were about 3 seconds of like dead silence. You could hear a pin drop in the room. And after he answered, there was a journalist sitting next to me who turned to me and said, "You could feel the air go out of the room when you asked that question." So, I think it really was challenging to them.
Well, it must have been exciting for you,
yes, it was very exciting.
As a journalist and someone who writes. So good for you.
Yeah.
How do you think the group dealt with examples of countries like Ireland that are so Catholic, who put to a vote the question of marriage equality and just completely ignored the church's position on it?
Yeah. I think there were some bishops who I think it was divided, the Synod, about things like that. There were some bishops who are ready to acknowledge that Catholic people don't accept the teaching about marriage that the church has been promoting. But then there were some who feel, well, we weren't strong enough in our opposition to same-sex marriage, and if we were stronger, it would have been different. So it was divided.
And that poses, I think, a pretty tough challenge for church leaders who are trying to preserve a belief system, a doctrine, you know, do you as a religious organization change your doctrine because the followers disagree with you? You know, is that a reason to change the belief system and the doctrines of faith?
Right. You know, that's a very good question. And, you know, it's something that came up time and again at the Synod. And I think that one thing that I noticed even the progressive bishops don't realize is that the reason they need to change the doctrine is not because people oppose it, but why people oppose it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and I think that's an important distinction. And the problem is that many bishops don't want to change the doctrine due to public pressure, but they don't recognize that they might need to change the doctrine because of Catholic pressure. Catholic people are supporting marriage equality because they are Catholic, not in spite of being Catholic. They are looking at other Catholic values other than procreation to support their view of marriage equality for lesbian and gay couples.
Mm-hmm. And
so
go ahead.
So they're using very Catholic arguments. They're not using the political and legal arguments that the secular gay activists have been using. They're using Catholic arguments to support the idea that marriage should be open to lesbian and gay couples.
So it's really about, it all boils back, as it typically does, to interpretation of Scripture, you know, and contextual interpretation, moving away from a literalist interpretation and looking at it how it applies in today's world. Is that fair?
Yes, that's one that in the Catholic tradition. That's definitely one plank in the teaching, and in the Catholic tradition there are other philosophical arguments and traditional arguments from tradition that also go into it. But Scripture is definitely a big one.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about where things are going and the change that's coming. It's pretty clear. The Pope has a different idea about LGBT people in general. He's all but said that. And you mentioned the product that comes from this. It's called an
apostolic exhortation.
Okay. And wasn't it in that same type of publication that Pope Benedict described LGBT people as intrinsically disordered?
Well, it was a similar type of document, yes, and that it was a document from the Vatican. So yes, it was, and that was in 1986. But at the meeting, at the Synod, we heard bishops for the first time, and a number of them, saying this language is harmful. This language is inaccurate. This language has to change.
So I want to go back just for a second. You mentioned that was written in 1986. Mm-hmm. Who wrote that?
The author of it was Cardinal Ratzinger.
Oh, okay.
At the time, when he was head of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, before he became Pope Benedict.
Got it.
Almost 20 years later. But it was signed by Pope John Paul II, the document.
Okay. So it had the Pope's endorsement, perhaps not his exact words, but then when the then Cardinal became Pope, he owned it. It was his. And he didn't take any move to change that or reinterpret it at all. I mean, I think he believed it. At least that's what he said, right?
Right. He was definitely behind using that kind of language. And I think, to explain Pope Benedict, I think we have to remember that Pope Benedict, Cardinal Ratzinger, was a theologian and a scholar, and not a pastoral person. Mm-hmm. Not someone who had a lot of experience working with people. So I think that his use of terms and terminology, came from a very academic point of view, and so I don't think he was aware of how people's lives are affected by certain terms and certain use of language.
Almost the polar opposite of a Jesuit.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And this Jesuit, who's Pope in particular, who really is, a man of the people, and he would take public transportation to work when he was Archbishop of Santiago not Santiago. I'm sorry, Buenos Aires in Argentina.
And certainly continuing that same tradition. He lives
simply now.
Simply now, and
meets ordinary people.
Yeah.
He his famous line, one of his first addresses to bishops, was that he wanted bishops to smell like the sheep. He said, sometimes they use the term that the bishop is a shepherd, and he says he didn't want bishops who have a princely attitude. He wanted bishops that smelled like the sheep, that were living the life of the people.
Well, let's hope that they start paying attention to that and
yes.
and move toward that. What's your speculation as you look out in the future? Going back to that language, intrinsically disordered, it's very, very damaging. Do you think that the Pope is going to remove that language in his tenure?
I'm not sure the Pope has the power to do it, but it's interesting that the Pope has never used that language, in his almost 3 years into his papacy now. And I think, honestly, it's going to be a case where we're going to start to see new language being used, and that language is just going to die away, from disuse.
Good. Well, I think one of his greatest challenges is going to be getting his cardinals and bishops in line with his thinking. It's like moving. It's greater than moving the Titanic. It's not going to happen overnight, but every time a cardinal in this country, for example, speaks out and makes a statement like "You're not entitled to communion because this is what you believe," it just reinforces the inequality there, the lack of acceptance, the lack of inclusivity, and pushes people away. And so I hope that he's able to do that. I hope he's able to grab those guys and say, listen, you work for me, and this is the way we should be talking. Mm-hmm. Is that even realistic to think that?
I think it's realistic in a few ways. I think one is that, the people, the men who he has been appointing as bishops, particularly here in the United States, are people who have his point of view, who have his pastoral approach. One of the bishops at the synod is the new Archbishop of Chicago, Blaise Cupich. At a press conference, I was able to ask him. I said, "Do you think?" Let me back up and say that at the synod, they had married couples speaking to the bishops, making presentations about marriage and family life. So I was able to ask Archbishop Cupich at a press conference if he felt the bishops would have benefited from hearing testimonies from lesbian and gay people and lesbian and gay couples. And he said, yes, they would have. He acknowledged that would have been a better idea to let lesbian and gay people speak to the bishops. So, I think we're going to see more and more bishops like Archbishop Cupich being appointed.
Good for you. That's great that you're able to pose those questions out there, and perhaps you're going to cause them to think differently just by having been there. That's terrific. Terrific.
Yeah.
So another story that's come out after this big meeting now, and it actually happened, I think, during the meeting of the bishops, is a senior priest, a Monsignor at the Vatican, came out as being a gay man and introduced the world to his boyfriend, or at least said he had a partner, and then he was terminated. He was defrocked. Right. And he's had some very, very strong criticism of the homophobia and the hypocrisy that exists in the Vatican. Can you speak to that a little bit? What's going on with this guy?
Yeah. Well, I think it was a moment of truth for him, that he felt he could no longer live a double life, and wanted to live a more authentic life. And so he felt that it was important to acknowledge his orientation, and then even acknowledge a relationship. And I think he did it as he said it. I think, it was true that he did it right before the synod started, so that it would be on the synod participants' minds that there are gay men in the priesthood, that there are gay and lesbian people serving the church, and to make that reality more present to the bishops as they were having discussions about this.
Well, he certainly did that, and it cost him his career, which is understandable in some respects. I mean, if the rule of the church is celibacy, then that should apply to straight and gay and everybody in between. We can debate the validity and worth of that as a separate issue, but a rule is a rule, and that's a condition of employment, and so I get that. It's going to be interesting to see what comes from this and his story as he tells more.
Yes.
Again, hopefully it'll get people to talk. I mean, that's how change happens.
Right.
There's a lot of folks, and we've talked about this before, I believe, who really struggle with trying to reconcile who they are with their faith and make both of those things work. And the tragedy, I think, is not just with Catholics, but Mormons too. People are making choices. In order to live with myself and accept myself, I'm going to step away from my faith or step away from the church, which I always think is tragic, because faith can be a really good thing in people's lives. What's your advice for LGBT Catholics who are having a hard time reconciling what they're being told to believe and the rules and accepting themselves?
Right. Well, my advice for anyone who's having a debate about that is that they seek out a supportive spiritual counselor, someone who's going to accept them for accept their sexual orientation as a given and as something that is positive in their lives. And I think that what people need to decide is, is being part of the church harmful to my relationship with God, or is it helping my relationship with God? And if it's being harmful, the important thing is not church membership. The important thing is relationship with God. And if, after discerning with a spiritual counselor that it's harmful and they feel they have to leave, maybe for a while, maybe forever, leave the church, I think that's what they have to do. They have to follow their conscience.
So where can people go to learn more about LGBT accepting organizations within the Catholic Church? Certainly New Ways Ministries is a place to go. Are there others in the country?
Sure, there are. They could come to our website, newwaysministry.org, or they could look up our blog, Bondings 2.0. And they could also look, there are other Catholic organizations. There's a group of parents, Catholic parents of LGBT people called Fortunate Families. There's a national organization of LGBT Catholics called Dignity USA. There's a Catholic social justice organization that works on LGBT issues called Call to Action. And there are countless gay-friendly parishes around the country. If they come to our website, they can find some that are near their home.
Fantastic. And if you miss those websites, we'll have them all on our website at outbeatnews.com. We've been talking with Francis DiBernardo, who is the Executive Director of New Ways Ministry. Francis, it's always great to talk with you, and thank you for providing the insight on what's going on in the Catholic Church.
Well, I'm greatly appreciative of this opportunity. Thanks, Greg. It was a great talk.
And that brings us to the end of our hour. My thanks to Amy Nutt, Wayne Maines, and Francis DiBernardo for being with us tonight. Tune in next Sunday night for a very special Outbeat Extra featuring an evening of healing music performed by our own Sheridan Gold and friends. That'll air at 8 p.m. and only here on KRCB Radio. In the meantime, from all of us on the Outbeat Radio team, have a happy and safe Thanksgiving holiday, and thanks for spending your Sunday night with us. Outbeat News in Depth is hosted and produced by Greg Moralia exclusively for KRCB Radio. You can listen to our shows on demand on iTunes and on our website at outbeatnews.com. And be sure to follow us all week long on our Facebook page and Twitter feed for the latest LGBT news from here in the North Bay and beyond.